The day of my husband's funeral was a blur of black dresses, whispered condolences, and the heavy scent of lilies. I stood by his casket, numb, barely able to process the endless stream of faces offering their sympathy. My world had collapsed in a single, shattering moment, and now I was left to pick up the pieces in front of everyone who thought they knew our story. I clung to the memory of his laugh, the warmth of his hand in mine, and tried to believe that this was real, that he was truly gone. As the service ended and people began to drift away, I reached into my purse to silence my phone, desperate for a moment of peace. That's when I saw it. A new message from my husband's number. My heart stopped. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting some cruel prank or a delayed message he'd scheduled before his death. But what I read made my blood run cold. I am still alive. Trust no one. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was this some sick joke? Had someone stolen his phone? Or was it possible? No, impossible. That he was alive, somewhere out there, watching me grieve. I looked around the room, suddenly suspicious of every face, every comforting touch. Who could I trust? What secrets had been buried with my husband, and what danger was I in now? As I stood there, clutching my phone, I realized my nightmare was only just beginning. Who sent the message? What really happened to my husband? And how far would I have to go to uncover the truth? My name is Julia, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had found my forever. I met David when I was 26, a whirlwind romance that swept me off my feet and made me believe in the kind of love you read about in novels. He was charming, attentive, and had a way of making me feel like the only person in the room. Our first date lasted until sunrise, and by the end of that week, I knew I wanted to spend my life with him. We built a life together, brick by brick, through laughter and tears, triumphs and setbacks. Our home was filled with warmth, Sunday morning pancakes, lazy afternoons in the garden, and the quiet comfort of shared routines. David was the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries, who left little notes in my lunch bag, who held my hand in public just because. We weren't perfect, but we were happy, or so I thought. Family was everything to us. We had 2 children, Emma and Ben, who became the center of our world. David was a devoted father, the kind who showed up for every recital and soccer game, who read bedtime stories with silly voices and made pancakes shaped like animals. Our house was always full of friends, of laughter, of the kind of chaos that comes from a life well lived. I used to look around the dinner table and feel a deep, quiet gratitude for the life we'd built together. But beneath the surface, there were shadows I chose not to see. David's work as a financial consultant often took him away from home. Late nights at the office, business trips that sometimes stretched longer than planned. I missed him, but I trusted him. I believed in the vows we'd made, in the foundation of honesty and love we'd built. When he'd come home tired and distracted, I chalked it up to stress, never daring to question what else might be weighing on him. Our marriage, like any, had its share of arguments and misunderstandings. There were times when we drifted apart, when the demands of work and parenting left us feeling more like roommates than lovers. But we always found our way back to each other, always made time for date nights and quiet conversations after the kids were asleep. I thought we were strong enough to weather any storm. When David died suddenly, a car accident on a rainy night, my world shattered. The call came just after midnight, a voice on the other end telling me what no one ever wants to hear. I remember dropping the phone, the room spinning, my knees buckling as the reality crashed over me. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements, paperwork, and the suffocating weight of grief. I moved through it all in a daze, barely able to breathe, let alone think about what came next. The funeral was meant to be a goodbye, a chance to honor the man I loved and to begin the impossible task of moving forward. I stood at the front of the church, surrounded by friends and family, but I felt utterly alone. Every memory, every shared moment pressed down on me like a physical weight. I watched Emma and Ben cling to each other, their faces pale and lost, and I wondered how I would ever find the strength to hold us all together. In those first days, I clung to the life we'd built, to the belief that love could survive even this. I told myself that David was gone, that I had to let him go, that the only way through was forward. But as I would soon discover, the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My grief was real, but it was only the beginning of a story I never saw coming. The night David died is etched into my memory with a clarity that still makes me shiver. It was raining, the kind of relentless downpour that turns the world gray and makes every streetlight blur. I remember pacing the living room, glancing at the clock, waiting for the sound of his key in the door. He'd called earlier to say he was running late. Another client dinner, another promise to be home soon. I tried to ignore the worry gnawing at me, telling myself he'd walked through that door 100 times before. When the phone rang just after midnight, I knew before I answered that something was wrong. The voice on the other end was calm, almost clinical. A police officer explaining that there had been an accident on the highway. David's car had skidded on the wet road, spun out, and crashed into a guardrail. He was gone before the ambulance arrived, they said. There was nothing anyone could have done. I remember dropping the phone, the world tilting as I sank to the floor. My mind refused to accept it. I kept thinking, this can't be real. He'll walk through the door any minute. This is just a nightmare. But the nightmare didn't end. I called my sister, my voice shaking, and she came over to sit with me until dawn. I barely slept, replaying every moment of that day, every word I'd said to David, every "I love you," and every silence that now felt like a missed opportunity. The next days passed in a haze. I moved through the motions of grief, making arrangements, calling family, answering questions I didn't know how to answer. Emma and Ben clung to me, their faces pale and frightened, and I tried to be strong for them, even as I felt myself unraveling. I signed forms, chose a casket, picked out a suit for David to wear one last time. Each decision felt impossible, a final nail in the coffin of the life we'd shared. The house filled with people, neighbors, friends, relatives I hadn't seen in years. They brought casseroles and flowers, offered hugs and whispered condolences. I nodded and thanked them, but their words slid off me like rain on glass. I was numb, moving through a world that no longer made sense. Every room in the house was a minefield of memories. The kitchen, where we danced on Sunday mornings. The hallway where David would scoop up the kids and spin them around. The bedroom, where his scent still lingered on the pillow. At night, when the house was finally quiet, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of his breathing beside me. I kept expecting to hear his footsteps, to feel the bed dip as he climbed in, to wake up and find that it had all been a terrible mistake. But the silence was absolute, and the ache in my chest was a constant reminder that he was truly gone. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, tear-streaked faces, and the heavy scent of lilies. I stood at the front of the church, holding Emma and Ben's hands, trying to be strong for them. I listened to the eulogies, the stories of David's kindness and generosity, the memories that painted him as the perfect husband and father. I wanted to scream, to beg someone to tell me this wasn't real, but I stayed silent, my grief too deep for words. In the days that followed, I tried to find meaning in the chaos. I told myself that David's death was a tragic accident, that life was fragile and unpredictable, that I had to be grateful for the years we'd had together. But beneath the surface, 1,000 questions gnawed at me. Why was he on that road so late? Why hadn't he called again? Why did it feel like there was something I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit? I tried to push the doubts aside, to focus on healing, on helping Emma and Ben find their footing in a world without their father. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow at the edge of my grief. I didn't know it yet, but the real story of David's death was only just beginning to unfold. In the days after the funeral, the world felt both too loud and eerily silent. I tried to focus on the routines that had always anchored me, packing lunches, folding laundry, helping Emma with her homework, but nothing felt normal. The message from David's number haunted me, replaying in my mind every time I closed my eyes. I am still alive. Trust no one. I told myself it had to be a cruel prank, a glitch, or some twisted joke. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more it gnawed at me. I started to notice things that didn't add up. The first was David's phone itself. The police had returned his belongings in a small plastic bag: wallet, watch, wedding ring, but no phone. When I asked about it, the officer shrugged. "It must have been lost in the crash," he said. But if the phone was lost, how had I received that message? I checked the number again and again. It was his. The contact photo, the old texts, everything matched. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. No answer, no explanation. Then there was David's best friend, Tom. He'd always been supportive, but now he seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and changing the subject whenever I mentioned David's last days. At the funeral, I'd caught him whispering with David's sister, their faces tight with worry. When I asked what was wrong, they both brushed me off. "Just worried about you, Julia. You need to rest." But their concern felt forced, almost rehearsed. My mother-in-law, always so warm, became distant. She called less, and when she did, her voice was clipped, as if she was afraid of saying too much. Once I overheard her on the phone late at night, her voice low and urgent. When I asked who she was talking to, she snapped, "Just a friend," and quickly changed the subject. I tried to tell myself it was just grief, that we were all struggling to cope, but the doubts kept piling up. I started to dig. I went through David's office, searching for anything that might explain the message. I found a locked drawer in his desk, one I'd never noticed before. After searching the house for the key, I finally pried it open with a butter knife. Inside were files, bank statements, receipts, and a passport I didn't recognize. The name was David's, but the photo was different. He looked older, thinner, with a beard I'd never seen him wear. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages. Why would he need a second passport? What was he hiding? I tried to talk to Emma and Ben to see if they'd noticed anything strange before their father died. Emma shrugged, saying Dad had been extra tired lately, and Ben just wanted to know when things would go back to normal. I didn't want to burden them with my fears, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all living in a story I didn't understand. I reached out to David's office, hoping for answers. His assistant Carla was polite but evasive. "David was under a lot of stress," she said. "He was working on something big, but I don't know the details." When I pressed her, she grew flustered. "I really can't say more, Julia. I'm sorry." The conversation left me more unsettled than before. Even my own friends began to act strangely. Lisa, my closest confidant, started canceling plans at the last minute. When we did meet, she seemed distracted, glancing at her phone and steering the conversation away from David. Once, I caught her exchanging a look with Tom at the grocery store, a look that said more than words ever could. I began to question my own sanity. Was I seeing patterns where there were none? Was my grief making me paranoid? I reread the message 100 times, searching for clues. I scoured David's social media, looking for anything out of place. I even checked our security cameras, but the footage from the night of the accident was missing. Deleted, the system said, due to a technical error. The more I searched, the more isolated I felt. Every conversation felt loaded, every gesture suspicious. I started to wonder if I could trust anyone at all. Was someone watching me? Was I in danger? Or was I simply losing my mind, undone by grief and fear? One night, unable to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with David's passport and the files spread out before me. I stared at the unfamiliar photo, the strange stamps, the receipts from places he'd never mentioned. I thought about the message, about the people who were suddenly so eager to keep me in the dark. My hands shook as I realized the truth. I didn't know my husband at all. And if he was alive, if he was out there somewhere, then nothing in my life was what it seemed. I made a decision. I would find out the truth, no matter what it cost. I would follow the trail, ask the hard questions, and refuse to be silenced. I owed it to myself, to Emma and Ben, and maybe even to David. The message had said, trust no one. But I would trust myself. And I would not stop until I uncovered the secrets that had turned my world upside down. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house was finally still, and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway, I found myself drifting between memory and fear. I would close my eyes and see David's face, his easy smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the warmth of his hand in mine. I remembered the way he'd pull me close in the kitchen, swaying to music only we could hear, or the way he'd whisper, "Everything's going to be okay," when life felt overwhelming. Those memories felt like lifelines, but now they were tangled with doubt, each one shadowed by the question, was any of it real? I replayed our last conversation over and over in my mind. He'd called to say he'd be late, his voice tired but gentle. "Don't wait up," he'd said. "I love you." I'd said it back, not knowing it might be the last time. Now, I wondered if there was something in his tone I'd missed, a warning, a goodbye, a secret he couldn't bring himself to share. I tried to remember every detail, every word, searching for hidden meanings that might explain the message I'd received at his funeral. Sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard his footsteps in the hallway. I'd lie there, holding my breath, waiting for the door to open, for David to appear and tell me it was all a terrible mistake. But the house remained silent, and I was left with the ache of longing and the sharp sting of betrayal. I missed him so much it hurt, but I was also angry. Angry that he'd left me with so many questions, angry that I couldn't even trust my own memories. The fear of losing my mind was constant. I'd catch myself talking to David as if he were still there, asking him what I should do, begging him for a sign. I'd find myself staring at his photo, willing it to give up its secrets. Was I imagining things? Was my grief making me see patterns that weren't there? Or was I finally seeing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight? Flashbacks would hit me at the strangest times. I'd be making coffee and suddenly remember the way David used to tease me about my overly complicated order. Or I'd be folding laundry and recall the time he'd accidentally dyed all his white shirts pink. Those moments were bittersweet, reminders of the life we'd shared and the man I thought I knew. But now, every memory was tinged with suspicion. Had he been lying to me all along? Had he been living a double life right under my nose? I thought about the people around me, Tom, my mother-in-law, even Lisa, and wondered how much they knew. Were they protecting me? Or were they part of something darker? I replayed every conversation, every sideways glance, every awkward silence, trying to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The uncertainty was maddening. I felt like I was walking through a maze, every turn leading me further from the truth. The pain of not knowing who to trust was almost worse than the grief itself. I wanted to believe in the goodness of the people I loved, to trust that they had my best interests at heart. But the message from David's number had shattered that certainty. Trust no one. The words echoed in my mind, making me question everything and everyone. I felt isolated, cut off from the world I'd always relied on for comfort and support. Sometimes, I'd sit in the garden, surrounded by the flowers David and I had planted together, and let the memories wash over me. I'd remember the way he'd kneel in the dirt, coaxing new life from the soil, his hands gentle and sure. I'd remember the way he'd look at me across the dinner table, his eyes full of love and mischief. Those moments felt so real, so solid, that it was hard to reconcile them with the secrets I was now uncovering. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe again, if I'd ever be able to trust my own judgment. I worried about Emma and Ben, about how my suspicions and fears might affect them. I wanted to protect them, to shield them from the darkness that had crept into our lives, but I didn't know how. I felt like I was failing them, failing myself, failing David, whoever he really was. In my darkest moments, I questioned everything. Was I strong enough to face the truth, whatever it might be? Could I survive another betrayal, another loss? Or would I lose myself completely in the search for answers? The fear was overwhelming, but beneath it, there was a flicker of determination, a stubborn refusal to give up, to let the secrets win. I clung to that spark, telling myself that I owed it to myself, to my children, and maybe even to David, to keep searching. I didn't know where the path would lead, or what I would find at the end, but I knew I couldn't turn back. I had to keep going, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how afraid I was, because the only thing worse than not knowing was never finding out at all. The message from David's number had become a splinter in my mind, impossible to ignore. I could no longer pretend that everything was normal, or that my grief was the only thing haunting me. I needed answers, and I was done waiting for them to come to me. The time for polite silence was over. I started with Tom. He'd been David's best friend for years, practically a brother, and if anyone knew what was really going on, it would be him. I called and asked him to come over, my voice steady but my hands trembling. When he arrived, he looked tired, his eyes shadowed and wary. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where he and David used to share beers and talk late into the night. "Tom," I began, "I need you to be honest with me. Did David ever mention anything strange before he died? Was he in trouble?" He hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "Julia, I don't know what you mean. He was stressed, sure, but who isn't these days?" I pushed harder. "I got a message from his number. After the funeral, it said, 'I am still alive. Trust no one.'" I watched his face carefully, searching for any flicker of recognition or guilt. Tom's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might break. But then he shook his head too quickly. "That's impossible. Someone must be playing a sick joke. Maybe his phone was stolen in the accident." "Was it?" I pressed. "Because the police never found it. And I found things in his office, Tom. A second passport. Receipts from places he never told me about." "What aren't you telling me?" He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "Julia, you're grieving. You're seeing things that aren't there. David loved you. He would never." He stopped himself, jaw clenched. "I think you need to let this go, but I couldn't." His reaction only fueled my suspicion. After Tom left, I sat in the quiet kitchen, my heart pounding. I knew he was hiding something. I just didn't know what. Next, I called David's sister, Rachel. She'd been distant since the funeral, her calls short and her answers vague. When I asked her to meet, she agreed, but her eyes darted nervously as we sat together in a crowded cafe. "Rachel, please, I need to know the truth. Was David involved in something dangerous? Did he ever talk to you about leaving?" She shook her head, but her hands twisted in her lap. "He was under a lot of pressure at work. He said he was worried about something, but he wouldn't tell me what. I thought it was just stress. I never imagined—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, blinking back tears. "Did you see him the night he died?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "He stopped by my apartment. He seemed scared. He hugged me and said, 'If anything happens, take care of Julia and the kids.'" I thought he was being dramatic. I wish I'd asked more questions. Her words sent a chill through me. Why would David say something like that if he wasn't in real danger? What had he gotten himself into? I left the cafe with more questions than answers. Everywhere I turned, I hit a wall of half-truths and evasions. Even my mother-in-law, who had always been a source of comfort, seemed to be hiding something. When I asked her about the night of the accident, she grew defensive. "David was a good man. He would never do anything to hurt you. Let the dead rest, Julia." But I couldn't let it rest. The more I pushed, the more isolated I felt. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided my gaze, and even Emma and Ben seemed to sense the tension simmering beneath the surface. I tried to shield them from my growing obsession, but I knew I was failing. I was consumed by the need to know the truth, no matter the cost. I started digging deeper. I went through David's emails, searching for anything that might explain his behavior. I found encrypted messages, strange transfers between bank accounts, and references to meetings with people I'd never heard of. I tried to follow the trail, but every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. It was as if David had erased himself, leaving only fragments behind. One night, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. "Stop asking questions, Julia, for your own good." My blood ran cold. Was this a threat? Was someone watching me? I looked out the window, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the darkness. Fear warred with determination. I wanted to run, to protect my children, and hide from whatever danger was closing in. But I couldn't turn back. I owed it to myself, to Emma and Ben, to find out what had really happened to David. I reached out to a private investigator, a woman named Carla, who came highly recommended. She listened to my story without judgment, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You're not crazy," she said, "but you are in over your head. Let me help you." Together, we retraced David's last days, following the breadcrumbs he'd left behind. We discovered a storage unit rented under his alias, filled with documents, burner phones, and a journal written in code. Carla worked to decipher it, while I tried to keep my family safe and my own fear at bay. The sense of danger grew with every new discovery. I started noticing cars parked outside the house, strangers watching me at the grocery store, odd clicks on the phone line. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and kept Emma and Ben close. I was terrified, but I refused to be intimidated. Tensions rose with every confrontation, every secret hinted at but never fully revealed. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, unable to wake up. But beneath the fear, a new strength was growing, a determination to see this through, no matter what it cost. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know what I would find at the end of this journey, but I knew one thing for certain: I would not stop until I uncovered the truth, even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. It happened on a night when I was certain I couldn't go any further. The exhaustion had settled into my bones, and the fear had become a constant, low hum in the background of my life. I was sitting at the kitchen table, Carla's latest report spread out in front of me, when I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. It was nearly midnight. No one ever came by this late. I peered through the peephole and saw Rachel, David's sister, standing on the porch, her face pale and drawn. I opened the door, and she stepped inside, glancing nervously over her shoulder before closing it behind her. "Julia, I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't keep this to myself anymore." We sat together in the dim light of the kitchen, and Rachel took a deep breath. "I lied to you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "The night David died, he didn't just stop by to say goodbye. He gave me something. He told me to keep it safe no matter what." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, battered envelope. My hands shook as I took it from her. Inside was a flash drive and a single sheet of paper with a string of numbers and letters. Another code. He said if anything happened to him, I should give this to you. I was scared, Julia. I didn't know who to trust. But after everything that's happened, I can't keep it from you anymore. I stared at the flash drive, my mind racing. Was this the key to everything? The answers I'd been searching for? I thanked Rachel, hugging her tightly, and promised her I'd be careful. After she left, I called Carla, who came over immediately, her laptop in tow. We plugged in the flash drive and waited, breathless, as the files loaded. There were dozens of documents, bank transfers, emails, scanned passports, and a series of encrypted messages. Carla worked quickly, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she cracked the code on the sheet Rachel had given me. As the files opened, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece. David had been working as a whistleblower. He'd uncovered a massive financial fraud at his company, implicating powerful people, some of whom I recognized from the news, others whose names sent chills down my spine. He'd been gathering evidence for months, documenting every transaction, every threat, every attempt to silence him. The journal in the storage unit suddenly made sense. He'd been keeping a record, not just for himself, but for me, in case the worst happened. The messages on the flash drive revealed that David had been receiving threats. He'd tried to go to the authorities, but someone inside the system was working against him. The night he died, he'd planned to meet with a contact who could help him disappear until it was safe to come forward. But something had gone wrong. The accident, it seemed, was no accident at all. As Carla and I pored over the evidence, a new message appeared on my phone. This time, it was from an unknown number. "You're getting too close. Stop now or you'll end up like him." My blood ran cold. The danger was real, and it was closer than I'd ever imagined. I sat back, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Everything I thought I knew about David, about our life together, had been turned upside down. He hadn't just left me, he'd tried to protect our children, by keeping me in the dark. The message at the funeral wasn't a cruel joke or a hallucination. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to keep me safe. I thought about all the times I'd doubted him, all the anger and suspicion I'd carried. I felt a surge of guilt, but also a fierce determination. David had trusted me with the truth, even if it was only after he was gone. Now it was up to me to finish what he'd started. The next morning, I met with Carla and Rachel, laying out everything we'd discovered. We made a plan to take the evidence to a trusted journalist, someone outside the system who could help bring the truth to light. It was risky, but it was the only way to honor David's courage and to protect ourselves from the people who wanted to keep us silent. As I looked at my children, sleeping peacefully in their beds, I realized how much had changed. I was no longer just a grieving widow, lost in a maze of secrets and lies. I was a woman with a mission, armed with the truth and determined to see justice done. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had become fuel, driving me forward. The turning point had come, not with a bang, but with a quiet confession, a hidden envelope, and the realization that I was stronger than I'd ever believed. The story I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a new one I would write myself, no matter how dangerous the next chapter might be. The days that followed the revelation were some of the darkest I have ever known. The truth about David's secret life and the danger that now shadowed my every step left me feeling more isolated than ever. I had always thought of myself as resilient, but now I was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of secrets and fear. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face, sometimes loving, sometimes haunted, always just out of reach. I replayed the message from the unknown number over and over in my mind. "You're getting too close. Stop now, or you'll end up like him." The words echoed in the silence of the house, making me jump at every creak of the floorboards, every car that slowed outside. I started to wonder if I was being watched, if every shadow held a threat. I tried to keep life normal for Emma and Ben, but I could see the worry in their eyes. Emma asked why I was locking the doors so early, why I jumped every time the phone rang. Ben clung to me at night, whispering that he missed Daddy and asking if I would leave too. I reassured them as best I could, but the lies tasted bitter. I was terrified, not just for myself, but for my children, for Rachel, for anyone who might get caught in the crossfire. Carla, the investigator, became my lifeline. She checked in daily, but even she seemed on edge. "We need to be careful, Julia," she warned. "These people are dangerous. Don't trust anyone you don't absolutely have to." Her words only deepened my paranoia. I started to question everyone, neighbors, friends, even the police. Was someone following me at the grocery store? Was that car parked across the street just a coincidence? I felt hunted, exposed, and utterly alone. The practical consequences piled up. I missed work, unable to focus on anything but the growing sense of dread. Bills went unpaid, meals went uneaten, and the house grew cluttered and chaotic. I stopped answering calls from friends, too afraid to let anyone else in. The world shrank to the four walls of my home, and even there, I found no peace. One afternoon, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, David standing on a street I didn't recognize, looking over his shoulder as if he knew he was being watched. On the back, in block letters, was written, "You're not safe." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the photo. I called Carla, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do I do?" She told me to stay calm, to document everything, to keep the kids close. But her voice, usually so steady, was tight with worry. The isolation became suffocating. Rachel tried to help, but I pushed her away, afraid that my problems would become hers. I stopped confiding in anyone, convinced that the less people knew, the safer they would be. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The fear seeped into every part of my life. I stopped going outside except when absolutely necessary. I kept the curtains drawn, the lights low, and the doors locked at all times. I jumped at every unexpected sound, every knock at the door. I started to doubt my own judgment, wondering if I was overreacting, if the danger was real or just a product of my exhausted, terrified mind. Emotionally, I hit rock bottom. I cried in the shower so the kids wouldn't hear. I screamed into pillows, punched the mattress, begged David's memory for answers. I felt betrayed, not just by him, but by everyone who had kept his secrets, by the world that had become so dangerous and unpredictable. I wondered if I would ever feel safe again, if I would ever be able to trust anyone, even myself. The lowest point came one night when I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching the photograph and the flash drive, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt completely alone, abandoned by the man I loved, hunted by faceless enemies, and powerless to protect my children. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be broken. But even in that darkness, a tiny spark of determination remained. I remembered David's message, "Trust no one," and realized that, for all his secrets, he had trusted me to finish what he started. I wiped my tears, stood up, and promised myself that I would not let fear win. I would find a way out, for myself, for Emma and Ben, and for the truth that David had risked everything to reveal. In the aftermath of my lowest point, I realized I couldn't survive in fear forever. I owed it to myself, to Emma and Ben, and even to David to find a way forward. I spent a long night sitting at the kitchen table, the photograph and flash drive in front of me, searching for the strength to keep going. I thought about everything I'd lost, but also about everything I still had: a fierce love for my children, a stubborn will to survive, and a growing sense that I was stronger than I'd ever believed. The next morning, I called Carla. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I can't do this alone," I admitted. "But I can't hide anymore either. We need a plan." Carla listened, her tone shifting from cautious to determined. "You're right, Julia. We can't let them win by scaring you into silence. But we have to be smart. We need help from someone outside this circle, someone with power, but no ties to the people who want to keep this buried." That's when Carla suggested reaching out to a journalist she trusted, someone known for exposing corruption and protecting sources. The idea terrified me, but it also gave me hope. If we could get the truth out, maybe the people threatening us would back off. Maybe David's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. We spent the next few days gathering everything we had: David's files, the coded journal, the threatening messages, the photograph. Carla worked to encrypt our communications and set up secure meetings. I started documenting every strange occurrence, every suspicious car, every anonymous call. I felt a sense of purpose returning, a clarity that had been missing for weeks. The unexpected ally came in the form of Lisa, my old friend who had been distant since the funeral. She showed up at my door one afternoon, her face pale but determined. "I know I've been avoiding you," she said, "but I need to tell you something." She confessed that she'd overheard a conversation between Tom and another man at a coffee shop. Something about keeping Julia quiet and making sure the files never see daylight. Lisa had been scared, unsure who to trust, but seeing my fear and isolation had convinced her to come forward. Her information was the missing piece. With Lisa's help, Carla and I mapped out the connections between David's colleagues, the company, and the people who had been watching me. We realized that the danger was real, but so was our ability to fight back, if we were careful. We arranged a secret meeting with the journalist, a woman named Priya, in a crowded public place. I handed over the flash drive and the photograph, my hands shaking but my voice steady. Priya listened intently, asked careful questions, and promised to protect our identities. "This is big," she said, "but it's also dangerous. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I looked at Carla, at Lisa, and thought of Emma and Ben. "I have to," I said. "For my family, for David, for the truth." With Priya's help, we began to build a case. She started digging into the company's finances, interviewing former employees, and connecting the dots that David had left behind. Carla kept me updated, and Lisa became my anchor, helping with the kids and keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a team, a small, determined circle of women who refused to be intimidated. I also took steps to protect myself and my children. I installed new security cameras, changed our routines, and made sure Emma and Ben knew what to do if anything felt wrong. I talked to them honestly, without sharing the darkest details, and promised that I would keep them safe. Their trust gave me strength, and their love reminded me what I was fighting for. As the investigation gained momentum, the threats continued, but I refused to back down. Each new piece of evidence, each small victory, fueled my resolve. I was no longer just reacting to fear. I was taking action, reclaiming control over my life and my story. Through it all, I found a new sense of self. I was still afraid, but I was no longer paralyzed. I was still grieving, but I was no longer lost. I was a mother, a widow, and now a fighter. I had learned to trust my instincts, to lean on others when I needed help, and to believe that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. The plan was in motion. The truth was within reach, and for the first time since David's funeral, I felt hope, a fragile, flickering light, but enough to guide me through whatever came next. The day of reckoning arrived with a strange sense of calm. I woke before dawn, the house silent except for the soft breathing of Emma and Ben down the hall. I moved through the morning in a haze, making breakfast, packing lunches, hugging my children a little tighter than usual. I told them I loved them, that I'd be home soon, and watched as they left for school, their faces bright with the innocence I was fighting so hard to protect. Carla picked me up just after 9. She was all business, her eyes sharp and focused. "Priya's ready," she said. "She's got everything she needs. Today's the day." I nodded, my heart pounding but my mind clear. We drove in silence to the office building where Priya had arranged to meet with the authorities and present the evidence. The plan was simple. Priya would hand over the files, Carla would watch our backs, and I would finally confront the man who had orchestrated David's disappearance and tried to destroy my family. The building was bustling, people coming and going, oblivious to the storm about to break. We met Priya in the lobby, her face set with determination. "They're expecting us upstairs," she said. "But be careful. We don't know who's watching." We rode the elevator in tense silence, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket a constant reminder of everything at stake. When the doors opened, we were greeted by a pair of stern-faced investigators. Priya introduced us, and we followed them into a glass-walled conference room. I could see my own reflection in the glass, pale, tired, but unbroken. The meeting began with formalities, but it wasn't long before the true villain revealed himself. Tom entered the room, his expression cold and calculating. I felt a jolt of shock and betrayal. David's best friend, the man who had stood by my side at the funeral, was the one who had been pulling the strings all along. "Julia," he said, his voice smooth. "I wish it hadn't come to this." I stared at him, anger and disbelief warring inside me. "Why, Tom? Why did you do it? David trusted you." "We all did," he shrugged, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "David was going to ruin everything. He was going to expose the company, bring us all down. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. He thought he could play hero. I had to protect myself and everyone else who depended on me." The investigators pressed him, and Tom's composure began to crack. Priya laid out the evidence, bank transfers, coded messages, the photograph, the threats. Carla added her findings, connecting the dots between Tom, the company, and the shadowy figures who had threatened me. The room grew tense as the truth unraveled, each piece of evidence tightening the noose around Tom's neck. I found my voice, steady and strong. "You tried to scare me into silence. You threatened my children. You made me doubt my own sanity. But you underestimated me, Tom. You underestimated all of us." He glared at me, but I saw the fear in his eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Julia. These people." "I know enough," I interrupted. "And I'm not afraid anymore." The investigators took over, questioning Tom relentlessly. He tried to deflect, to blame David, to paint himself as a victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, he broke, confessing to his role in the cover-up and the threats against my family. He revealed the names of others involved, the network of corruption that had protected the company for years. As Tom was led away in handcuffs, I felt a wave of relief and exhaustion wash over me. The danger wasn't completely gone. There were still others out there, still risks to face, but the truth was finally out. David's sacrifice had not been in vain. The story he'd tried to tell would be heard. Priya promised to keep us updated as the investigation unfolded. Carla hugged me, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Julia. You saw it through." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "We did it. I couldn't have done any of this alone." We left the building together, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in months, I felt the weight begin to lift from my shoulders. I called Emma and Ben, my voice trembling with joy as I told them I was coming home. That night, as I tucked my children into bed, I told them the truth, not all the details, but enough for them to understand that their father had been brave, that he had tried to do the right thing, and that we were safe now. Emma hugged me tightly, and Ben whispered, "I knew you'd keep us safe, Mom." Alone in my room, I allowed myself to grieve for David, not just for the man I'd lost, but for the life we'd never get back. But I also felt a deep sense of peace. I had faced the darkness, uncovered the truth, and protected my family. I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The confrontation with Tom was the end of one story, but the beginning of another. I was no longer just a widow or a victim or a woman haunted by secrets. I was a survivor, a mother, and a fighter. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to face it, with courage, with hope, and with the unbreakable love that had carried me through the storm. In the days after Tom's arrest and the truth finally coming to light, I found myself moving through the world with a strange sense of weightlessness. The fear that had pressed on my chest for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet exhaustion and a cautious hope. I spent hours just sitting in the garden, watching the wind move through the trees, letting the sun warm my face. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like I was being watched. Emma and Ben seemed lighter, too. They laughed more, slept better, and started to talk about their father with a new kind of pride. I told them what I could about David's bravery, about how he had tried to do the right thing even when it was dangerous. We planted a tree in the backyard in his memory, a living reminder that even in the darkest times, something beautiful can grow. But healing wasn't instant. The scars of betrayal and fear ran deep. I found myself jumping at sudden noises, double-checking the locks at night, and feeling a pang of anxiety every time the phone rang. I knew it would take time to trust the world again, to believe that the danger was truly over. I set new boundaries, not just with others, but with myself. I promised to listen to my instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, and to never again let someone else's secrets become my burden. I also learned to ask for help. For so long, I had tried to carry everything alone, afraid to burden my friends or family with my fears. But now, I reached out to Carla, to Lisa, to Rachel, and even to Priya, who had become more than just a journalist, but a friend. We met for coffee, shared stories, and found comfort in each other's company. I realized that strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to lean on others and when to stand on your own. As the investigation continued, more names came to light, and justice began to take its slow, winding course. There were days when I felt angry at David for keeping so many secrets, angry at Tom for his betrayal, angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. But I also felt gratitude for the love I had shared with David, for the children we had raised together, and for the resilience I had discovered within myself. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what trust really means. I realized that trust isn't about blind faith or ignoring your instincts. It's about honesty, about being willing to see the truth even when it hurts, and about forgiving yourself for the times you get it wrong. I learned that love is not just about holding on, but about letting go of the need for certainty, the need for control, and the need to have all the answers. I started to rebuild my life, one small step at a time. I went back to work, found joy in simple routines, and made space for new dreams. I took Emma and Ben on a weekend trip to the coast, just the three of us, and we laughed until our sides hurt. I let myself imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear or loss, but by hope and possibility. There were setbacks, of course. Some nights, the old fears crept back in, and I would lie awake, listening to the quiet house, wondering what the next day would bring. But each time I reminded myself of how far I had come, of the strength I had found in the face of unimaginable challenges. I kept David's memory alive, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of courage and love. I forgave him for the secrets he kept, understanding now that he had been trying to protect us in the only way he knew how. I forgave myself, too, for the mistakes I made, for the times I doubted, for the moments when I was afraid. As I look back on everything that happened, I see not just a story of betrayal and loss, but a story of survival and transformation. I am not the same woman I was before David's funeral. I am stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with myself and with others. I know now that I can face whatever comes next, not because I am fearless, but because I have learned to trust myself. The aftermath of the storm was not just about picking up the pieces, but about building something new. something honest, resilient, and full of hope. And as I move forward, I carry with me the lessons of love, trust, and self-reliance, ready to write the next chapter of my life on my own terms. Aftermath. With the truth finally out and the shadows of the past beginning to recede, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new life, one I never would have chosen, but one I was determined to shape for myself and my children. The fear and uncertainty that had once ruled my days were replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense that I could trust my own instincts and build a future on my own terms. I started by reclaiming the small joys I had once taken for granted. I woke up early to watch the sunrise, savoring the stillness before the world stirred. I took long walks with Emma and Ben, letting them set the pace, listening to their laughter and stories. We made Saturday mornings our own, inventing new breakfast recipes and dancing in the kitchen to our favorite songs. These simple rituals became the foundation of our new family, reminders that happiness could be found in the present, not just in memories of what we'd lost. I also began to invest in myself in ways I never had before. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. The first time I picked up a brush, my hands trembled, but as the colors spread across the canvas, I felt a surge of freedom. I wasn't painting for anyone else's approval, just for the joy of creating something new. That feeling spilled over into other parts of my life. I started reading again, not just the news or work emails, but novels and poetry that made me dream. I joined a book club, where I found new friends and rediscovered the pleasure of sharing ideas and laughter. Financial independence became another pillar of my new life. I met with a financial advisor, learned to manage our accounts, and set goals for the future. It was daunting at first, but each small victory, balancing the budget, saving for a trip, investing in our home, made me feel more capable. I realized that I didn't need to rely on anyone else to feel secure. I could provide for my family, make decisions, and trust myself to handle whatever came our way. Emma and Ben blossomed in this new environment. I watched them grow more confident, more open, and more willing to share their feelings. We talked honestly about our fears and hopes, about David and the choices he made, about forgiveness and moving forward. We created new traditions, Friday night movie marathons, Sunday hikes, and a memory jar where we wrote down happy moments to read together at the end of each month. Our home was filled with light and laughter again, not because everything was perfect, but because we had learned to find joy in the imperfect. I also found strength in helping others. I volunteered at a local support group for women who had experienced loss or betrayal. Sharing my story, listening to theirs, and offering encouragement became a source of healing for me. I realized that my journey, painful as it had been, could be a beacon for someone else. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me, but by how I chose to respond. As the seasons changed, so did I. I let go of the need to control every outcome, embracing the uncertainty of the future with hope instead of fear. I traveled with Emma and Ben, exploring new places and making memories that were ours alone. I allowed myself to dream again, about love, about adventure, about a life that was rich and full, even if it looked nothing like the one I had planned. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who stood at her husband's funeral, lost and afraid. I was a survivor, a mother, a creator of new beginnings. I had learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, to forgive, and to love without losing myself. I had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in honoring it and choosing to move forward. Empowerment, I realized, wasn't about being invulnerable. It was about embracing my own story, scars and all, and believing that I was worthy of happiness. It was about building a life that reflected my values, my dreams, and my resilience. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of excitement, not for what I had lost, but for everything I had yet to discover. As I settled into my new life, I realized how much I needed and wanted to connect with others who understood the journey I'd been on. The isolation of grief and betrayal had been suffocating, but now, with the worst behind me, I was ready to reach out and find my place in a community of women who had walked similar paths. I started by attending a local support group for those who had lost loved ones or experienced deep betrayal. The first meeting was daunting. I sat in a circle of strangers, unsure if I belonged. But as the women began to share their stories of heartbreak, resilience, and hope, I felt something inside me soften. Their honesty was a balm, their courage a mirror for my own. I spoke, haltingly at first, about David, about the secrets and the fear, about the long road to healing. To my surprise, I was met not with pity, but with understanding nods and gentle encouragement. Week by week, I found myself looking forward to those meetings. I listened, I learned, and I offered what I could: advice, a shoulder to cry on, a reminder that none of us were alone. I saw women transform before my eyes, growing stronger as they shared their pain and their victories. Their stories became woven into my own, a tapestry of survival and hope. I also joined online forums where people from all over the world gathered to support one another. I wrote about my journey, about the moment I received that impossible message at David's funeral, about the fear and the fight and the peace I'd finally found. Messages poured in, some seeking advice, others simply grateful to know they weren't alone. I answered as many as I could, offering the lessons I'd learned: trust your instincts, ask for help, and never let someone else's secrets define your worth. Through these connections, I found a new sense of purpose. Helping others heal helped me heal too. I realized that my story, once a source of pain, had become a source of strength, not just for me, but for anyone who needed to hear that survival and joy were possible, even after the deepest wounds. In community, I found solidarity. In solidarity, I found hope. And in hope, I found the courage to keep moving forward, hand in hand with others who understood that healing is not a destination, but a journey we take together. If my story has taught me anything, it's that even when life unravels in the most shocking and painful ways, there's always a path forward. I learned that trust is precious, but it must be earned and protected. I learned that love can survive even the deepest betrayals, not by clinging to the past, but by choosing to heal and grow. And I learned that the strength to rebuild comes not from being unbreakable, but from allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to believe in new beginnings. I hope my journey reminds you that you are never truly alone, no matter how lost or afraid you may feel. There is a community out there, people who have walked through darkness and found their way back to the light, people who will listen, support, and encourage you as you write your own next chapter. If you're struggling with trust, with loss, or with the weight of secrets, know that your story isn't over. You have the power to choose what comes next. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? How did you find your way through? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs right now. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue sharing real stories of resilience, hope, and transformation. And if you're curious about what happens next, about the lessons I'm still learning, the new adventures I'm embracing, and the ways I'm finding joy in unexpected places, make sure to stay tuned. There are more stories to tell, more wisdom to share, and more hope to discover together. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of healing and new beginnings. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, your story is still being written.